On this week's episode, I-501-CU, the podcast for nonprofit board members, I am interviewing a very special lady to our community. She has done it all. Lisa Krouse, who is now the CEO of First Tee, and that's a relatively new role for her, but she has been in the for-profit sector, sat on boards, she's led nonprofits, she's been on boards, like I said, for nonprofits, and we're going to learn a lot today about leadership. That, and she's just one heck of a lady. So Lisa, if you would you please tell the audience a little bit about yourself, your background, your history, and how you came to all those roles I just mentioned, and now CEO of First Tee?
Yeah, well, thank you, Mike, for having me today. It's a pleasure, and I listen to your podcasts all the time, and your guests are always inspiring and talented. And I thank you for offering the community this service to all of us who strive to really improve our development, no matter what stage of our career we're in. I have found your podcast to be extraordinarily helpful. So, with my background, I started in the for profit sector. Obviously, folks know me as an attorney. Worked at some amazing organizations, including Zenith Insurance Company and FCCI Insurance Company, and then moved on to the board at FCCI. And one of the strong tenets of FCCI and really at Zenith as well was giving back to the community. And I think that's when I caught the bug of how important it is for organizations, no matter what stage of their lifespan you're in, whether it's early stage or whether it is a sophisticated insurance organization, that giving back to the community is so important to the lifeblood, to the sustainability of building community leaders and having a strong infrastructure to support the business. And so from FCCI, I became part of the nonprofit community, having moved into the chamber, and I felt that the chamber was such an amazing opportunity, really, to gain experience of an understanding of the full value of what community means. So, whether it was Leadership Sarasota or Leadership Florida, which I've participated in and can't say enough about, I joined the boards of All Faiths Food Bank, and also have sat on the board of the Gulf Coast Community Foundation. And so those boards have been extraordinarily instrumental in making sure that I'm connected to the needs of what the community is facing. And so my nonprofit moved to the EDC, the Economic Development Corporation, where I was CEO, then led me into this role, which is really focused on youth development. And that is really back to the beginning of what's important to me, which is building community leaders, building leaders that are available to sustain an organization, and really focusing on our generations of making sure that we have sustained success, not only in an organization, but in our communities as well.
Well, and Lisa is the CEO of First Tee, and that's Tee. She's an avid golfer, so it's just a fitting role for her. But Lisa, I want to go back. So you're Zenith, FCCI, very much for-profit companies in the insurance industry. You're on the board of Gulf Coast Community Foundation. You're on the board of All Faith Food Bank. You've run EDC. Can you compare and contrast a little bit about the approach and maybe the leadership from a for-profit and nonprofit perspective, if there is indeed a difference?
I think there is a difference, and I think there are extraordinary similarities. I think that the bridge from for profit to non for profit is probably much easier to make. Um, to me, I think, one of the things that is similar is a focus on mission, right? Why do we exist? What is it that we are supposed to be? What's the North Star? Where are we taking this organization? And I think sometimes as a nonprofit, we could have mission creep. Somehow seems to be an opportunity to expand our focus and not stay so centrally focused on what is truly the mission of the organization. When you're working for a for profit organization, at the end of the day, it's always about profitability. And so we're looking at diversity of products, diversity of skills, how to look at a future of an organization with some innovation and some creativity, because we want to make sure that we're sustaining that opportunity for profitability long into the future. For a nonprofit, it's staying true to the mission and how do we build an infrastructure and a foundation that is going to outlast any one of us in this organization if the organization, that nonprofit, is to be meaningful to a community.
Oh, that's well articulated. And let me ask you, so you've been a board member of both for-profit organizations and nonprofit. Could you
That's
talk a
right.
little bit about compare and contrast the governance
Yeah.
of those and the role of the board
Yeah.
members?
Yeah. I think when you're working for a for profit organization, the governance issues are truly embedded in the operations in a way that becomes second nature. W- When you're focused on a nonprofit, you have changing boards and you have changing people, chairwomen, chairmen. And so governance is a matter of education. And I believe, Mike, and I know you do too, just listening to the focus of your podcast, having a governance focus, that strength at the foundation is so critically important to a nonprofit. And so it's almost like every new board chairperson, we're going back to the foundation of making sure that everything is in place.
Very good. So you board member, and now you're the CEO, the executive director of a nonprofit. The second one, I believe, I know
Yes.
EDC, right?
Yes.
Public-private partnership, and now this one. So
Yep.
how do you approach this role working with board members, having been a former board member?
Yep. Well, it's interesting because I think with a nonprofit, the board members are there because they represent an aspect of the community. They represent, it could be a geographic diversity, it could be diversity in skills and backgrounds and what they bring to the conversation at a board table for a nonprofit. When you're looking at a for profit organization, you're really looking at sustained, lasting commitment. Someone who is going to be building that vision, but also, it's executing on the vision as well. And so I think it becomes paramount that focus on leadership development, on your executive leadership. Succession is so important. And I think that's why, whether it was at the EDC or whether it is at now the First Tee, I'm always thinking about succession at every level of of the organization, whether it's entry level or beyond, right? I want to always make sure that there is a lasting legacy of what we're doing. Does today matter? And I think for a for profit organization, that succession becomes part of daily conversations. I think it's awkward and it's sometimes uncomfortable in a nonprofit organization to be talking about succession. So, I think that that's probably the biggest disconnect for me is that it's like, why are you talking about succession? Are you leaving? Are you doing something with my job? What are you doing? And I'm like, no, this should be part of the fabric of what's important, particularly in a board conversation. So constantly trying to bring it back to that, but it's not unusual at a for-profit organization to be talking about these things and to be holding others accountable for making sure that there's sustained pipeline of succession and leadership within the organization.
Spoken like a true chief human resources officer, of which you were at FCCI for a number of years. Boy, I would expect nothing less from you, and I like the way you stated that. So you move into the nonprofit sector, your second one you're running. What are the biggest challenges you have found with running a nonprofit?
Mike, I'm sure I share the same um difficulty as every other nonprofit, and it really is about funding. When you're talking about a for profit organization, we're talking about profitability and about sales and about, how we make sure that we are looking at opportunities to diversify whether it's book of business or the product base. In a nonprofit, we're always looking for funding. That's how we grow. That's how we are able to touch more lives. That's how we are able to impact community. And the funding is a real issue. It's hard. It's hard to compete against others who are asking for funding for just as important stuff, sometimes even more important. It's hard to ask for funding when we know that everyone is stretched. We know that it's hard to ask for funding when there are so many important things that we're focused on. And certainly that's what Leadership Florida and Leadership Sarasota, I think, brings to the table is just how vast the needs are in our community. So, I think the funding for me is that's challenging. It's a real challenge. And, to find people, to find foundations, to find organizations that are aligned with your mission. So it's important to be able to tell the story of what the need is, where our sweet spot is for the giving back. And you can't lose sight of, as I said, what that North Star is. And so once you find the connection with those organizations and those individuals and those foundations where they understand and there's truly an emotional connection with what you do, that's when everyone's smiling. You're like, This is it. We got it." It's important, but also I think sometimes it is about education about what you do. So, for example, we've built a beautiful partnership with Goodwill, Minnesota. And you say, Lisa, how you're focused on youth development through the game of golf. How could that be? Well, we've got to make sure that our youth have no barriers and access to the game of golf. And sometimes clothing and equipment can truly be an obstacle. And so our Goodwill Minnesota partners make sure that no kid goes without having appropriate clothing and appropriate tools to make sure that they could play the game of golf in any environment. And so we're grateful for partnerships like that. Um, and it goes without saying. So it is making sure that we're thinking through what the obstacles are for our kids when they are looking at, whatever challenges they're facing. And certainly financial challenges in this particular game could be an obstacle. And we don't want any kid to not have the opportunity to learn that golf is so much more than a sport, right? It's about relationships. It's about your future opportunities, whether it is, internships and jobs, or whether it is simply about access to relationships that they might not ordinarily have because of the game. And so it's a door opener, if you will.
Oh, that's well stated. In the story you're telling, you're painting a great picture. I'm curious, and you mentioned something the partnership with, in this case, Goodwill Minnesota, and so partnership in the nonprofit space is different than partnership in the for-profit space, and really readily more acceptable. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you learned and what your observations are from a partnering perspective?
Yeah, I think this was my most important lesson, Mike, and the most powerful aspect of elevating what we do at the First Tee. We have built just a beautiful, beautiful partnership with, give you a couple of examples, with the Newtown Connection, which is a part of the Boys and Girls Club. And there could be nothing more inspiring than to see our kids through the Newtown Connection flourish through the game of golf. You take Easter seals. These past couple of weeks, we've provided classes within Easter seals, and it's been such a beautiful experience for our coaches, giving access again to a game, but really it's about character development and it's about all the life skills that we learn through that game. Girls Inc., such a beautiful relationship and giving access to girls to this game that will forever change their life through relationships that they will have because of this game. So the partnerships that we're building, Palmetto Youth Center in Bradenton through Reggie Bellamy has been just a beautiful experience. And so I have learned that leveraging the community partnerships is really a powerful way to escalate impact both for that nonprofit and for ourselves as well.
And through these partnerships, so you increase impact, which does increase costs, and this is where it's a little different, right? You're about the impact,
Yeah.
and so you think big and you explore opportunities. How do you fund things like that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's going to come as no surprise that our community really is just enormously generous. And so one of the first partnerships, Mike, will, and it comes as no surprise, was through Baransik. And actually saw Baransik this morning during the opening of Margie's Market, which is in Newtown through Goodwill. And you look at that and you're like, we're so connected, we're so interconnected with each other. But Baransik was an early supporter of my coming in and wanting to think a little differently about elevating community impact through our nonprofits, and they were right there. And of course, it goes without saying that we have tremendous funders in our community that are right there to support us when they see that there is truly a community impact and we're going to be making a difference. I think our community doesn't lack for generosity. That is for sure.
Yeah, we're very blessed, and
We
and
are.
but I also think it's a testament to you coming into this role and saying, "I've got to look externally, not internally." I'm sure you had to do operational
You
things,
are
but it's
so right. That is exactly what I said, and those are exactly the words I used.
well, and you've obviously done that. So you turned outward looking and said, "We're going to become a member of the community," and that doesn't happen overnight. And so I guess, call on relationships, you establish new relationships, and you paint that vision. Can you just share your approach to maybe that brand new executive director out there? She is just moving into the role, and she's maybe in a similar situation.
So, my first advice would be to surround yourself with the right team. And I was lucky enough to have an enormously inspiring team within the First Tee. But to that person, that leader who's coming into an organization, and that really is for profit or non for profit, the first thing that has to be focused on is the team that you have. In many instances, it's your brand, right? It's the representation of who you are. And so you've got to get that right. I would say that's part of the foundation, not only having a strong board and making sure that your board is aligned with your mission and you understand what the expectations are from that board to what they expect of you, particularly new coming into this journey that you're embarking on. Being aligned with the expectations of the board, making sure that the team you have in place are aligned with where you are going as a leader, and making sure then that the foundation is set from a governance standpoint and from a discipline standpoint. So, one of the very first things that I did, and I know you will appreciate this, Mike, from listening to many of your podcasts, is really audited the organization from an organizational standpoint, taking a look at the financials, the financial practices, the processes, making sure that from a risk management standpoint, you're paying attention to insurance, just looking at that full operational picture of how do we operate and is the strong foundation piece in place so that it will hold you as you're now elevating performance and looking externally. And the team is a big part of that and what they do and how they do it.
Very good. So let me ask you this, and this is the last question as we wind down. Is it easier to run a for-profit or a nonprofit?
Oh, that's a tough question. Oh my goodness. That is we might have to put a pause on this
Yeah,
one.
yeah, I'll give you my answer. I think a nonprofit.
You
I think a
do.
nonprofit, for some of the reasons you just articulated, especially the funding, the fundraising, and you don't pick your clients, right? You do, but you don't type of thing. We're in the for-profit sector. We've got the ability to raise money by spending, by selling more product service, and we can also pick and choose who we want to serve. That's just my
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
observation. What do you think?
Yeah. I think uh, managing and leading and having a focus in the nonprofit community, I think, is a bit easier because you have a group of individuals who are passionate and who believe in the mission. Not that that isn't true for a for profit organization, but there are so many other interesting obstacles that you're facing when you're looking at profitability and you're looking at expansion and you're looking at product development. When you're dealing with a nonprofit, you've got your one mission, you've got to stay true to that mission, and everyone in your circle is aligned with what that mission is. I think when you are working for a for profit organization, whether sitting on the board or you're within the organization leading or even at any level in the organization, I think making sure that you're always thinking creatively, being innovative, challenging the direction that you're going because you need to be on the forefront of what's happening in the future. That future focus is so critically important. In a nonprofit, it's really about sustained success and about that commitment to the community and the mission. So I might agree with you that I think nonprofit leadership is somewhat easier than for-profit leadership.
Well, you have given me a lesson, and all of our leaders a lesson. I thought that was said extremely well, Lisa. And you have earned your stripes through the for-profit sector and now leading a nonprofit. The CEO of First Tee, ladies and gentlemen, Lisa Krouse. Lisa, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Well, I thank you, Mike, for what you're doing in terms of your contribution to making us all better.
Thank you much, Lisa. All right, now it's time for Recapping with Reed. Reed, Lisa gave us a lot of very good information. What are your top 3 takeaways?
Just the emphasis on succession in the nonprofit space. She compared to the for-profit. We're always talking about succession in the for-profit space. It's a very common conversation to be having, but in the nonprofits, it's a little bit taboo, but it needs to be at the forefront of everything because your role as a leader, as a board member, as an employee is to create a sustainable organization that's going to continue to succeed past your time.
Yeah, very well stated, Reed. And number 2.
Her advice to new executive directors was to focus on your team first because they are your brand. They are your representation in the community. You need to have a strong team around you before you can focus externally.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. She mentioned that twice about being the brand in the community. I thought that was very insightful. Number 3.
When she was comparing and contrasting for-profit and nonprofit leadership, she talked about mission creep in nonprofits. It seems like we're always able to expand our focus if we want to. And for nonprofits, that thinking is a little bit differently because you're willing to expand your focus if it's profitable. But in a nonprofit world, it has to be related to the mission. It all has to come back to the mission.
Yeah, scope creep is a real thing, or mission creep, if you will, because we want to help, right? Nonprofit sector, that's why we're in the sector. We want to help and make a positive impact. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the 3 top takeaways by Reed Corley on Recapping with Reed. And we will I-501 see you next week.